I never believed the warmth of a family could turn so bitter. I never imagined my own flesh and blood would watch me be cast aside and do nothing but look away. But in my 70 years on this earth, I've learned that life always keeps one last card up its sleeve. And when you're left with nothing, that's when you find the courage to play it. What you're about to hear isn't just an old woman's lament. It's a testament to the fact that it's never too late to reclaim your story. My name is Beatrice, but most folks called me Granny B, and this is my reckoning. My life was built on the bedrock of family. For 50 years, I was married to Arthur, a man with hands of stone and a heart of gold. We built a life, a home, and we raised a daughter, Caroline, in the sleepy town of Oak Creek. Every stitch I sewed, every pie I baked, every sacrifice we made was for her. She was our world. When Arthur passed 2 years ago, a part of me went with him. The big house we'd shared echoed with a silence that was louder than any noise. The gardens we'd tended together just felt like work. So I sold it. Caroline and her husband, David, suggested I come to stay with them in the city for a while. Or at least Caroline suggested it. David's offer was about as warm as a January frost. I moved into their modern townhouse, into a small room that faced a brick wall. I tried to be useful. I'd cook David's favorite meatloaf. I'd dust the shelves. I'd fold the laundry with the precision of a soldier. I was trying to earn my keep, to be invisible, to not be a burden. But David had a way of making a person feel small. His sighs were heavy with irritation if I asked what time he'd be home for dinner. He'd switch off the radio program I was listening to without a word. I once overheard him on the phone, his voice a low grumble. It's like having a permanent guest who doesn't understand the visit is over, I told myself. I was being a sensitive old fool, but a chill had settled in my bones. Caroline, my sweet Caroline, she saw it all. But she'd just pat my hand and say, "Don't mind him. Mom, he's under a lot of pressure at the firm." So I swallowed my pride. That's what a mother does. We absorb the hurt so our children don't have to feel the sting of it. But the night it all shattered was a Tuesday. I'd made a pot roast, the way Arthur always loved it. We were eating in near silence. The only sounds the clinking of cutlery and David scrolling on his tablet. Then he put his fork down with a sharp clink. "Beatrice," he said, his voice flat, "we need to talk about the future." I looked up, my heart beginning to thud a slow, painful rhythm against my ribs. The future? This arrangement? He gestured around the room with his knife. It can't be permanent. You're not contributing to the household. We have our own lives to build. The air left my lungs. I turned to Caroline, my eyes pleading. "Caroline!" She wouldn't look at me. She stared at her plate, her voice a fragile whisper. Maybe it would be better for everyone if you found your own place, Mom. Something more suitable." Suitable. The word hung in the air, cold and final. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply stood, my knees protesting, and walked to my room. I packed my 2 suitcases with the remnants of my life, photo albums, Arthur's old watch, my clothes. The tears didn't come until I was standing on the sidewalk outside, the wind whipping my thin coat around me. The door had closed behind me without a sound. Caroline hadn't followed me out. I sat on a bus stop bench for an hour, my dead phone clutched in my hand. The city lights blurred around me. I was 70 years old, and I had nowhere to go. I found a room at the Starlight Motel, a place where the neon sign flickered more than it shone, and the carpet smelled of forgotten dreams. That first night, I lay on the stiff bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, wondering how the love I had poured into my daughter for a lifetime could have evaporated so completely. The days bled into one another, a monotonous gray. I sent Caroline messages. "I'm safe. I love you. Thinking of you." The silence that echoed back was a louder reply than any words. My savings were dwindling. I tried to find work, but who hires a 70-year-old woman with arthritis in her hands and grief in her eyes? I was a relic, obsolete. One evening, desperate for a connection to anything warm, I dragged my memory box out from under the bed. It was just an old cardboard crate, but it held my history. I sifted through faded photographs of Arthur and me, Caroline's childhood drawings, and then my fingers brushed against soft, worn leather. It was my mother's diary. Lillian. I'd forgotten it was in there. Her elegant, looping script was as familiar as my own face. I settled back on the bed, the lamplight casting a weak glow on the pages. Most of it was the mundane poetry of daily life, recipes, weather notes, complaints about the price of butter. But then, an entry from October 1953 made my breath catch. He visited today. He still carries the same sorrow in his eyes. He speaks of a life we could have had, if things were different. But he has a reputation, a family name to uphold in Hartford. Beatrice must never know the truth of her father. She must always believe she was the daughter of the man I married. It is the only way to keep her safe, to give her a normal life. I read the paragraph again and again. The truth of her father. My heart hammered against my chest. I flipped frantically through the pages, my old fingers fumbling. There were more hints, clandestine meetings, whispered promises. She never used his full name, only his initials, WJT. But then an entry from years later. W was here today. He is unwell, and it weighs on his conscience. He has made provisions. He told me he has set up a trust for Beatrice, to be managed by his attorney, a Mr. Henderson in Hartford. It is not part of his official estate. It must be discreet. But he has promised she will be cared for. He said, "Tell her I loved her in my own flawed way." Mr. Henderson, Hartford. The pieces, dusty and disconnected, began to shift. It took me 3 days and the help of a patient librarian at the public library to find him. Franklin Henderson, now semi-retired, but still listed with a law firm in Hartford. My hand trembled so violently I could barely hold a pen. I wrote him a letter, explaining who I was, who my mother Lillian was, and humbly asked if he would speak with me. A week later, the motel room phone rang, a sound so rare it startled me. It was him. His voice was old, raspy, but clear. "Beatrice," he said. "I've been waiting for this call for a long time. There is something here for you." I took a train to Hartford, my single suitcase packed with a mix of hope and terror. Mr. Henderson's office was a sanctuary of wood and leather, smelling of old books and important secrets. He was a kind-faced man with spectacles perched on his nose. "Your mother was a remarkable woman," he began, his voice gentle. "And your father, he was a complicated man, but he loved you." He slid a sealed, yellowed envelope across the desk. It was addressed to my dearest Beatrice. The letter was from Walter James Thorne. The name sent a jolt through me. Walter J. Thorne. The Thorne family was old money, their name on buildings and charities across the state. A man I had seen in history books. His words were filled with a lifetime of regret. He confessed to the love affair with my mother, the child they created, me, and his cowardice in never claiming me. "In death, I wish to do what I never had the courage to do in life," he wrote. "I acknowledge you as my daughter. A portion of my personal holdings, separate from the Thorne family trust, has been set aside for you. Franklin Henderson holds the key." Mr. Henderson then opened a sleek, modern folder. Inside were bank statements, stock certificates, and deed to a small, vacant commercial property. The total value was not astronomical, but to me, it was a fortune. A little over $1.5 million. I stared at the numbers, my vision blurring. "This is real?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "It has always been yours, Beatrice," Mr. Henderson said softly. "He just didn't know how to give it to you while he lived." I didn't faint. I didn't shout. I sat in that quiet office with the gentle hum of the city outside, and I felt a seismic shift within my soul. I was not just Beatrice, the discarded grandmother. I was Beatrice Thorne. And for the first time since Arthur died, I felt a flicker of something I thought I'd lost forever. Power. I didn't go back to the Starlight Motel. I rented a comfortable, furnished apartment in a nice part of the city. I bought new clothes, not fancy, but well-made, clothes that spoke of quiet confidence. I felt like a spy in my own life, moving through a world that had once rejected me. With Mr. Henderson's guidance, I set up an LLC, Lillian's Legacy Holdings. I became a student again at 70 years old. I learned about property taxes, tenant law, and investment portfolios. Grief and humiliation had been my professors, and they had taught me well. It was during my research that I found it, a listing for a small 8-unit apartment building. It was a little tired, a little worn, but structurally sound. The location sent a shiver through me. It was their building, the very one where David had looked me in the eye and told me I was a burden. I didn't see it as revenge. I saw it as reclamation. I saw it as balance. Through my LLC, I placed a bid at the silent auction. The process was calm, bureaucratic, and utterly final. When the confirmation email arrived, I sat at my small dining table, a cup of tea cooling in front of me, and I smiled. I owned the roof over my son-in-law's head. A month later, the new lease agreements went out. For David and Caroline, the rent was increased to precisely triple what they had been paying, not out of greed, but out of a simple, cold application of the current market rate for a newly improved property. The explosion was immediate. Caroline called me, her voice tight with panic. "Mom, you won't believe it. Our rent has gone through the roof. David is furious. He's talking to lawyers. What are we going to do?" I let the call go to voicemail. This was not my storm to calm. This was the consequence of their own making, and they needed to feel its full weight. I began making improvements to the building. I fixed the leaking roof, repainted the hallways, and planted flowers in the courtyard. The other tenants were delighted. Their quiet gratitude was my reward. David, however, saw every improvement as a personal insult. He flooded the property manager with angry emails, demanding to know the identity of the new owner. I drove by one evening. Their living room light was on. I could see David pacing, his arms waving in the air. Caroline was sitting on the couch, her head in her hands. I watched for a moment, a complex knot of sorrow and vindication tightening in my chest, and then I drove away. The final move was the mandatory tenants meeting. I arrived early, dressed in a deep blue dress, my silver hair styled. I looked like someone they would never recognize. The room was full of murmuring tenants. David marched in, chest puffed out, ready for a fight. Caroline slipped in behind him, looking thin and anxious. The property manager gave his updates and then said, "And now the owner of the building would like to say a few words." I stood and walked to the front of the room. The air left it in a collective gasp. David's face went from red to purple. Caroline's hand flew to her mouth. "Good evening," I said, my voice steady, carrying in the stunned silence. "My name is Beatrice, and I am the owner of this building." "You?" David spat, surging to his feet. "This is a scam! This is harassment!" "It is business, David," I said, my gaze level. "Nothing more, nothing less. The same cold business you taught me the night you put me out." He spluttered, incoherent with rage. Caroline just stared at me, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrifying understanding. "You did this to punish us," David snarled. "No," I said softly, turning my gaze to my daughter. "I did this to remind you that everyone has value. Even a 70-year-old woman you thought was used up." I concluded the meeting and walked out, leaving them in the wreckage of their own assumptions. The silence that followed me was the most powerful sound I had ever heard. In the weeks that followed, David's bluster collapsed under the weight of legal threats from my attorney after he tried to dig up dirt on me. He left, his tail between his legs, moving to another state. Caroline, finally, began to see the cage she had been living in. She showed up at my new apartment one rainy afternoon, holding my mother's diary. "I found it," she whispered. "I read it. Mom, I'm so sorry for everything." We talked for hours. Real talk, for the first time in years. She told me she had asked David to leave. She was getting help. She was remembering the woman I had raised her to be. I sold the apartment building. It had served its purpose. I used the money, combined with my inheritance, to do two things. I bought a charming, small cottage back in Oak Creek, near my old home, and I made a sizable donation to a local senior center, funding a new program to help elderly folks who had fallen on hard times, naming it the Lillian Thorne Outreach. The day I moved into my cottage, Caroline was there, helping me unpack. We didn't speak of the past. We planted a rose bush together in the front garden, its roots digging deep into the earth. That night, after she had gone, I sat on my own porch, listening to the crickets sing. The air was sweet with the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. I was home. Not just in a house, but in myself. They had tried to make me small, to make me quiet. But in the end, they taught me the most valuable lesson of all, that a granny's strength is the deepest root, and it's never, ever too late to bloom. The silence after the meeting was a living thing in my new cottage. It wasn't the lonely silence of the motel. It was a deep, settling quiet, the kind that comes after a long storm has passed. I expected to feel triumphant, but mostly I felt tired. The kind of tired that sinks into your bones after you've carried a heavy weight for too long and have finally, blessedly, set it down. Caroline didn't contact me for a week. I didn't reach out. Some fences need to be mended from both sides, and she needed to pick up her own tools. When she finally did call, her voice was different. Not the frantic, scared woman from before, but quieter, more grounded. "Mom," she began, "I've started seeing a therapist." I simply listened, my heart feeling too full to speak. She's helping me see patterns. How I let David make me smaller. How I confused obedience for love. She paused, and I could hear her steadying her breath. I went back to the townhouse to get the rest of my things. It felt hollow, like a stage set after the play is over. All his bluster, all my anxiety, it was just gone. It left nothing behind but dust. "I'm proud of you, Caroline," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "I'm not asking to move in with you," she said quickly, almost reading my mind. "I found a little apartment near my work. But could I come by on Saturday? Maybe we could plant that vegetable garden you always talked about?" Tears welled in my eyes. It was such a simple, ordinary thing, but it was everything. Saturday arrived with a sky of brilliant, cloudless blue. Caroline showed up in old jeans and a t-shirt, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail, looking more like the girl I remembered than she had in years. She carried bags of soil, seed packets, and 2 new trowels. We worked side by side in the plot I'd marked out behind the cottage. The sun was warm on our backs, the earth cool and rich in our hands. We didn't talk about David or the inheritance or the building. We talked about the proper depth for tomato plants, whether marigolds really kept the pests away, and the stubborn rock that we had to dig out together, laughing as we struggled. It was in that mundane, beautiful work that the healing began. We were not a drama to be resolved, but a relationship to be rebuilt, one handful of soil at a time. As we patted the earth around the last seedling, Caroline sat back on her heels, wiping her forehead with the back of her glove. "I remember doing this with you and Dad," she said softly. "In our old backyard. I hated weeding, but I loved the smell of the tomato plants." "He loved watching things grow," I said, a familiar ache of love for Arthur blooming in my chest. "He said it was the closest thing to magic." She looked at me, her eyes clear. "He'd be proud of you, Mom, for growing through all of this." In that moment, surrounded by the promise of new life, I felt his presence, and I knew she was right. Just as a new rhythm was beginning to form, the past sent one last echo. It came in a thick, cream-colored envelope, the return address a law firm in Hartford I didn't recognize. For a moment, a cold dread gripped me. Had David found some way to cause more trouble? Inside was a letter from a Ms. Eleanor Vance, the current executor of the Thorne family estate. My heart hammered. She requested a meeting, stating it pertained to unfinished matters from Walter Thorne's will. Fear turned to a steely resolve. I would not be intimidated. I called Mr. Henderson. "Ah, Eleanor," he said, his voice calm. "She's a good sort, Beatrice. Strict, but fair. I suspect this is about the formalities. The Thornes are very particular about their records. I'll accompany you." The meeting was in a sterile, modern conference room a world away from Mr. Henderson's cozy office. Ms. Vance was a woman in her 60s with a severe haircut and intelligent eyes. She acknowledged me with a curt nod. "Ms. Beatrice," she began, opening a file. "The Thorne family has become aware of the disbursement from Walter's private holdings. While they do not contest it, it was legally his to give. There is a matter of historical record. Walter left a letter for you, to be delivered by the estate executor upon the passing of his wife, which occurred 6 months ago. With the unusual circumstances of your inheritance, it was only recently brought to my attention." She slid a single, sealed envelope across the table. It was heavier paper than the first, with my name written in the same hand I had seen in the diary. With trembling fingers, I opened it. "My dearest Beatrice, if you are reading this, then the world I built has finally ended, and the truth can no longer harm the living. I have followed your life from a distance, a silent ghost filled with pride and regret. I saw you marry your Arthur, a good man, a far better man than I. I saw you raise your beautiful daughter. You built a life of love and integrity, something my wealth could never purchase. The money is a paltry thing, a coward's apology. This letter is my true legacy to you. I want you to know that you were not a secret to be ashamed of. You were the most beautiful secret I ever kept. You are my daughter. In my heart, I claimed you every day. I am so very proud of the woman you became. Please do not think of me with bitterness. Think of me as a man who loved your mother too much to ruin her life, and loved you too much to ever truly let you go. With all the love I was too cowardly to show. Your father, Walter," I wept. Right there in that cold conference room, I put my head in my hands and wept. Not tears of sorrow, but of release. The final hidden shard of shame, the feeling of being an illicit secret, was washed away. I had been loved. I had been seen. Armed with the full, unvarnished truth of my past, I felt a new purpose ignite within me. The money was no longer just a tool for survival or reclamation. It was a resource, a responsibility. I set up a small but robust scholarship fund in my mother's name, Lillian, for single mothers seeking to further their education. It was my way of honoring her silent struggle. For Walter, I made a significant donation to the local historical society, not in the Thorne name, but in the name of Walter and Lillian, finally uniting them in a small public way. Caroline was by my side through it all. She helped me with the paperwork, her sharp mind a great asset. We were no longer just mother and daughter healing old wounds. We were partners, building something new and good from the ashes of the past. One evening, over a dinner of salad from our own garden, she looked at me, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Mom," she said, "I've been thinking. I don't want to go back to corporate marketing. It feels empty. Watching you, seeing what you're doing with the foundation, it's made me realize I want to help people." My heart swelled with pride. "What did you have in mind?" "I was thinking of getting certified as a financial literacy counselor. I could help people, especially women our age, understand their money, their rights, how to stand on their own 2 feet. She smiled, a little shyly. I learned from the best. The summer was waning when an unfamiliar car pulled up outside my cottage. A woman, perhaps in her late 40s, got out. She was elegantly dressed and had a familiar, sharp bone structure. She walked up to my porch where I was shelling peas. Beatrice? She asked, her voice cultured and soft. I am, I said, setting my bowl aside. I'm Eleanor Thorne. Walter was my grandfather. I froze. The legitimate granddaughter, the heir to the world I was never a part of. She must have seen the wariness in my eyes. Please, she said, holding up a hand. I'm not here to cause trouble. May I sit? I nodded, and she took the chair opposite me. I found my grandfather's letters to your mother, she said, looking out over my garden. After my grandmother passed, I was going through his private study. He loved her very much, and he loved you. She turned her gaze to me, and her eyes, the same shade of blue as Walter's in his photographs, were not hostile, but curious. I've spent my life believing my grandfather was a stoic, unemotional man. Finding those letters, it was like meeting a stranger, a better stranger. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the rustling of the oak leaves. I suppose I just wanted to see you, she said finally. To see the other part of him, the part that was capable of such a great, if quiet, passion. She stood to leave. Your garden is lovely. It feels honest. And with that, she left. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no new family found. It was simply an acknowledgement, a closing of another loop. We were two branches of the same tree, forever separated, yet connected by the same deep roots. Autumn painted Oak Creek in fiery hues. My garden, once just a plot of turned earth, was now a tangle of life. We had harvested tomatoes, cucumbers, and fat orange pumpkins now sat on my porch steps. Caroline came over every Sunday for dinner, her laughter filling the cottage with a music I had feared was lost forever. She had enrolled in her certification course and was thriving, her eyes alight with a purpose I hadn't seen in her since she was a young girl. We were both, in our own ways, starting new chapters late in life. On one particularly crisp evening, we sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, sipping hot apple cider. I'm sorry, Mom, she said out of the blue, her voice soft but clear. Not just for what happened with David, but for all the years I took you for granted, for not seeing the strong, incredible woman right in front of me. I reached over and took her hand, her fingers cold around the warm mug. The past is just soil, Caroline, I said, using a metaphor that now felt deeply true. It can be barren and hard, or it can be rich and full of potential. It's what we choose to plant in it that matters. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat there in the gathering dusk, watching the stars emerge one by one. The house behind us was warm and bright. The garden before us was sleeping, ready for its next season of growth. They had left me out in the cold, believing my story was over. But they were wrong. At 70 years old, I had learned that every ending is just a new beginning in disguise. My name is Beatrice. I am a mother, a grandmother, a daughter, a secret, and a survivor. And my story, our story, is finally, beautifully, just beginning. The first frost came last night, painting the world in a delicate, crystalline sheen. From my kitchen window, I watch the sun rise, setting the frozen dew ablaze. The garden sleeps now, the tomato vines blackened, the marigolds bowed. But beneath the quiet earth, the roots are holding fast, dreaming of spring. Caroline will be here soon. It's Tuesday, our day. She brings fresh bread from the bakery, and I make the tea. It's a simple ritual, but it's the bedrock of my happiness now. I walk slowly to the living room, my knees complaining as they always do in the cold. I pause before the mantelpiece. There's a new photograph there, nestled between one of Arthur and one of my mother, Lillian. It's a picture of Caroline and me, taken just last month, standing in front of this very cottage, our arms around each other, squinting in the sun. We look happy. We look like us. The letter from Walter rests in a small wooden box beside it. I don't read it often anymore. I don't need to. Its truth is woven into me now, a thread of validation that finally completed the tapestry of my life. He was not a ghost to haunt me, but a missing piece of a puzzle, now found and gently set into place. A car door slams outside. A moment later, the front door opens, letting in a burst of cold air and the warm, yeasty scent of bread. "Mom, I got the sourdough you like." "In here, dear." Caroline bustles in, her cheeks pink from the cold. She's cut her hair shorter. It suits her. She looks lighter, as if she's set down a burden she'd forgotten she was carrying. She puts the bread on the table and comes to stand beside me, following my gaze to the photographs. "We look good," she says, smiling. "We do," I agree. We move to the kitchen and I pour the tea. We talk about her classes. She's already helping 2 other women at the community center with their budgets. We talk about the new family that moved in down the road. We talk about nothing of great importance and everything that matters. This is the peace I fought for. This is the warmth I built from the cold. After she leaves, promising to come by at the weekend to help me put up the storm windows, the cottage settles back into its quiet. I pick up my mother's diary from the side table. The leather is soft, the pages fragile. I don't open it. I just hold it. It is no longer a source of shocking revelation, but a cherished, quiet companion. It is the story of a woman who did the best she could with the choices she had, just as I did. Just as Caroline is doing now. I think of David sometimes, a fleeting thought like a passing cloud. I feel no anger, only a distant pity. He was a small man in a small world, and his noise has finally faded into a silence he can no longer disturb. The sun is higher now, melting the frost from the window pane. I see my reflection, an old woman with silver hair and lines etched deep by time, by laughter, and by tears. I see my mother's eyes. I see Arthur's stubborn chin. I see a flicker of Walter's quiet intensity, and I see myself, Beatrice, the one who held it all together. They tried to write me off. They thought my story was a simple tale nearing its end. But they were wrong. The greatest stories aren't about the loudest battles or the most dramatic victories. They are about the quiet resilience of a root-cracking stone to find water. They are about the last leaf, golden and defiant, clinging to the branch through the first storms of winter, a testament to the strength of the tree that bore it. My life is not a reckoning anymore. It is a testament to the love that endures, to the strength that emerges when you have nothing left to lose, and to the beautiful, ordinary magic of a second chance. Thank you for following Granny Beatrice's journey. Remember, no matter the winter, there is always a spring waiting.